If the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover left you a little confused, don't worry. You're not alone. The good news is that we're here to sort out a few of its more convoluted aspects and explain just what's going on and why. Who exactly is the guy who shows up in Purgatory and bestows seemingly unfathomable cosmic powers on Oliver Queen? He identifies himself as Jim Corrigan, the Spectre, but if you haven't had your nose buried in DC Comics for the better part of your life, that probably didn't answer any questions. Despite being a relatively obscure character, the Spectre is a favorite for this kind of world-shattering event because he's the literal embodiment of the wrath of God. He's less of a person and more of a force of nature, a vessel for divine fury with cosmic power even Superman could only imagine. Unfortunately, it turned out that turning God's vengeance into a person without any mitigating force could lead to some abuses of power. To temper his vengeance and create a new superhero in 1940, the Presence bound the Spectre to Jim Corrigan, a cop who had been killed by criminals, returning him to life as a ghostly superhero. Eventually, Corrigan worked off enough of his sins that he was allowed to move on to his final reward, and the Spectre force was passed down to others. After his death, Green Lantern Hal Jordan was the Spectre for a while, and then Gotham City detective Chris Allen was drafted into the job. It's never been handed off to Oliver Queen in the comics, but the fact that both characters wear costumes built around green hoods makes the shift in wardrobe an easy one. Most heroes only get one chance to sacrifice their lives to save the world. Oliver Queen got two. Once as Green Arrow, fighting to the death against the Anti-Monitor's army of shadows, and then again as the Spectre, seemingly sacrificing his life to end the threat to the multiverse. The Anti-Monitor's death didn't really stick, though, so is Oliver really dead?
You remember what I told you?
Dying is the easy part.
The answer most likely is a frustrating one. Yes and no. Oliver's definitely dead. He's the Spectre. And as the name implies, the Spectre is quite literally a ghost. That said, as far as superheroes are concerned, death is not a permanent state. The real question is whether Oliver Queen will stick around in his new phantasmal form, and the answer to that is probably. If he's the Spectre, that means he's beyond the traditional boundaries of life and death, meaning that he has a pretty good chance of coming back as the driving force of a future CW crossover. If Stephen Amell ever gets bored with whatever he's going to do after 8 seasons of Arrow, with a distinct possibility he'll jump into professional wrestling. One of the major selling points for the CW Crisis was that it included nods to the entire history of DC Comics films and TV shows. Some, like the Smallville scene or the visit to Earth 99, were pretty relevant to the plot, while others were basically just cameos, and they might have gone by too fast for viewers who don't have vast portions of who's who in the DC universe memorized to keep up with. This is another reference to the original Crisis on Infinite Earths comic, which also opens with the destruction of a handful of DC's long-standing parallel worlds, complete with the red skies and fade to white. While the comic starts off by obliterating Earth 3, the show opens up with 2 incarnations of the Dark Knight being wiped out of existence, Earth 89 and Earth 66, setting the trend of Earths mostly being numbered the years that they debuted. Neither of the Earths the event opens with actually show that world's version of its main character, Batman. On Earth 89, we catch up with the intrepid reporter Alex Knox and Danny Elfman's classic score, letting us know we're in the world of the 1989 Batman film. After that, we skip over to the decidedly retro Earth 66, where Burt Ward appears with a color scheme that lets us know we're seeing the Robin of the classic Batman TV series.
Holy crimson skies of death!
We also see the Huntress running around on rooftops on Earth 203, a reference to the Birds of Prey series which aired its single season back in 2003. There are a few notable exceptions to the year rule, though. For instance, we see a Superman killed by Lex Luthor on Earth 75. It's actually a reference to a single comic. The shot of Superman and Lois that we see on the news is lifted from 1994's Superman 75, the climax of the famous Death of Superman story in which the Man of Steel was killed by Doomsday. When the Superman of Earth 96 joins up with the crew, there are a few jokes made about how weird it is that he looks exactly like Ray Palmer, although no one ever bothers to give a reason why. The obvious real-world reason is that both characters are played by Brandon Routh, who starred as the Man of Steel in 2006's Superman Returns. Superman 96 is pretty clearly meant to be the same Superman played by Christopher Reeve in the 1978 Superman film and its 3 sequels. And Routh has played that character before. Superman Returns was meant to pick up after Superman 2, ignoring the last 2 movies. When he sees Lois, we get a brief excerpt of "Can You Read My Mind?", the love theme from Superman the movie. And then there's this line.
Actually, this is the second time I've gone nuts and fought myself.
That's a callback to Superman 3, where Superman splits into Clark Kent and Superman to fight himself in a junkyard. But why is he on Earth 96 and not Earth 206 or Earth 78? Routh's Man of Steel isn't just from the movies. It's also a clear reference to Mark Waid and Alex Ross's landmark 1996 comics miniseries Kingdom Come. The deaths of Lois Lane and the rest of the Daily Planet staff at the hands of the Joker are lifted from that story, as is the black and red emblem that Superman wears in mourning. One of the grimmest moments of Crisis on Infinite Earths comes when Supergirl and Batwoman take a visit to Earth 99. Kevin Conroy, best known for his starring role in Batman the Animated Series starting in 1992, plays a version of Batman who is given into his darkest impulses. Bruce 99 appears to be in an incredible amount of pain, both mental and physical, but we don't get a lot of details as to what happened to make him this way. He does mention that his world's version of Kate Kane had been killed in action as Batwoman, helping push him over the edge. Luke Fox tells Supergirl that many of his injuries are the result of his fight with Superman, though that doesn't seem to be the entire truth of the matter. Like Superman 96, Bruce 99 takes his look from Kingdom Come, where he's depicted wearing a similar exoskeleton. In their annotations to that story, Waid and Ross told readers that there was no single event that caused this level of injury, and that it was just the toll of years and years of getting in multiple fistfights with Gotham's weirdest villains. The 99, by the way, is probably a reference to Batman Beyond, which premiered in 1999 and where Conroy voiced an older Bruce who was a bit worn down, but not villainous. In recent memory, Tom Welling has played Clark Kent longer than anyone else, starring in 10 seasons of Smallville. But he only once donned Superman's red and blues throughout the show's run, so it makes sense that when the heroes of the Arrowverse catch up with Smallville's Clark on Earth 167, he still isn't Superman. Much to Lex Luthor's disgust, Clark actually gave up his powers to focus on starting a family with Lois.
You gave up your powers?
Can't say I've missed these chats.
You were basically a god. You could fly.
This particular plot point seems to be loosely inspired by Alan Moore and Kurt Swan's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, the final Superman story before the end of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths comics. In that story, it's revealed that Superman gave up his powers by exposing himself to gold kryptonite, which permanently strips Kryptonians of their metahuman abilities. It's pretty safe to assume that Smallville's Clark did the same, especially since gold kryptonite was introduced in Smallville's last season. The comic book Crisis on Infinite Earths streamlined DC's comic book Multiverse, which had spread out over worlds including Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth X, Earth C, Earth C-, and so on, into one single universe. The TV version has done the same, putting the main CW shows into one cohesive Earth Prime. One of the reasons that DC had such a convoluted multiverse is that, unlike their competition at Marvel, where the universe and many of its core characters had been created by a relatively small group of people and focused mainly on New York, the DC universe was much more of a patchwork. The characters had mostly been created in isolation, sometimes by different publishers who were acquired by DC after the fact. The same goes for the shows. Arrow came first and spun off directly into Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Batwoman. But Supergirl originally aired on CBS and was completely separate from the CW shows until a crossover established it as a parallel world. Black Lightning started off on the CW, but it was set in a different universe in hopes of establishing its lesser-known hero outside of the shadow of the other characters. With Supergirl, Flash, Batwoman, Legends of Tomorrow, Black Lightning, and Arrow now combined into the newly christened Earth Prime, there's a shared history, creating a world where all the characters exist alongside each other. So after 8 years of Arrow, we finally have a world where Superman and Batman coexist with the other heroes, finally making the DC TV universe feel whole. Characters can interact without the need for another world-shattering interdimensional crossover.
I mean, how often does the world almost come to an end?
Oh, it's like that.
So it's likely that we could see more instances of the shows crossing over in the future. It's a lot easier to have the Flash hang out with Supergirl when he doesn't have to vibrate to a parallel world. The DC TV multiverse has been at the center of several crossovers that have become an annual tradition. A major character on The Flash, Harrison Wells, is built entirely around swapping out with his own interdimensional counterparts every now and then, forcing poor Tom Cavanaugh to do a new accent every couple of months while ostensibly playing the same guy. With that in mind, it seems like the shows would be giving up a lot of potential stories with everything combined into the new Earth Prime. But unlike the comic, the shows didn't actually ditch the idea of the multiverse. The main CW shows have all been added to a single Earth, with the in-story reason being that they're the homeworlds of the 7 Paragon characters who saved the entirety of existence, but there are plenty of other worlds out there. In addition to confirming that the DC films are a part of this multiverse through a surprise cameo from movie Flash Ezra Miller, it also preserves some of the other shows. The shows streaming on DC Universe make it through, with Earths 9, 19, and 21 being established as the settings for Titans, Swamp Thing, and Doom Patrol, respectively. Earth 96 is shown to survive with Brandon Routh's older Superman, and we also see Earth 12, hinted at being the setting for HBO Max's upcoming Green Lantern show. For longtime comic book readers, the most interesting reveal might be the all-new Earth 2, which will be the home of the upcoming Stargirl show. In the comics, Earth 2 was the home of the original Golden Age heroes of the Justice Society of America, who debuted in the 40s, and as time went on, their descendants. Stargirl herself was a reimagining of one of those Earth 2 characters, the Star-Spangled Kid, and with the show drawing on the histories of JSA characters such as Wildcat and Dr. Midnight, setting it there makes a lot of sense. It allows her world to have a different history, playing into the idea of legacy that's so core to her character, without interfering with the new history of Earth Prime. While the original comics Crisis is largely known as the crossover that got rid of Earth 2, the TV version is one that has introduced it to a whole new generation. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite superhero shows are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.